Hey everybody, you're going to want to start reviewing Module 5 because you have a quiz coming up this Wednesday on Module 5 material. Now, as soon as you're done preparing for the quiz, and once you've knocked that out, start on Modules 6 and 7. Next week, you're going to have to tackle both Modules 6 and 7. Again, this is an accelerated summer course, so you want to jump on that as soon as possible. On Wednesday at noon, you have a Module 5 quiz due right around lunchtime. Don't confuse this with midnight. This is a noon deadline, so it's due right in the middle of the day on Wednesday. Your tip of the week this week deals with naming. When you come across a formula like NaCl, we don't want to just have to call it NaCl, we want to have a name for it. But first we have to decide which naming rule set to use. We have molecular naming and we have ionic naming. Our first step is going to be to decide whether we have an ionic or molecular formula. So rule number 1, if we can spot a metal or a polyatomic ion off of your list for Module 5, then we've got an ionic compound. Now, let's look at the compounds we have here. On the left, we have NaCl. NaCl contains sodium and chloride. Chloride's a nonmetal, it's not something we're looking for, but sodium is a metal. Because this contains a metal, NaCl, we can consider ionic. Let's look at our second example, NH4NO3. Now, all of these, the N's and the H's and the O's, all of these are nonmetals. But NH4 is a polyatomic ion off of your list in Module 5. Presence of a polyatomic makes this ionic. NO3 is also nitrate, another polyatomic. So NH4NO3, or ammonium nitrate, is ionic. So we've been focusing on being able to identify molecular and ionic compounds. But now we're at step 2. We've identified, now we have to put things into practice. NaNO3 contains 2 indicators that this is an ionic compound. Sodium is a metal, left side of the periodic table, and it's indicating we have an ionic compound. NO3, nitrate. It's one of your 10 polyatomic ions off of the list of 10 to memorize from Module 5. Now, put this together, we can start naming it. We name the same way we read, left to right. First element we come across is Na, sodium. This part of the name comes straight off the table. You'll have a periodic table with names on it, so you don't have to memorize the name of every element on the table. The second half of the name is nitrate. So when we put it together, we get sodium nitrate. The only time you won't see the IDE ending is when you have ates and ites and us's and eums, and these strange endings come as a result of having polyatomic ions in the name. That's why they have to be memorized, because they're not our typical endings. So let's continue on with our first step of deciding whether we have a molecular or ionic compound. Now, rule number 2 is, if we have only nonmetals that are making up our substance, we're looking at a molecular substance that we're going to need to name. Nonmetals, just a reminder, are on the upper right side of the periodic table, on the upper right side of the stair step. So looking at our formula, SF6, if you pull out a periodic table, you can pause the video now to pull one out. You can see that sulfur and fluorine are on the upper right side of the periodic table, both nonmetals, making SF6 molecular. So we'll have to apply the molecular naming rules from Module 4. Our first step was to decide whether we had molecular or ionic formulas to deal with. Now we've ruled SF6 as a molecular compound, so we're going to have to use our prefixes from Module 4 to name this. Now, we name this the same in the way that we read a book. We look at the formula left to right, and we name the formula left to right. So the first element we come across is S. S on your periodic table is sulfur. You'll have a periodic table on tests, so you won't have to memorize the names of all of the elements. And the second element is fluorine. Now we can't call this sulfur fluorine. We'll have to adjust it a bit using prefixes. We're going to name this sulfur hexafluoride. So the first part, sulfur, we don't have to use the prefix mono, because if we ever just have one of the first element, you can omit the mono from the name. The second part of the name is fluoride. We throw the hexa in right here because we've got 6 of our fluorides. We take the element name fluorine off the periodic table, eliminate its ending, and replace it with IDE, leaving sulfur hexafluoride. For more practice with molecular naming, head back to Module 4. So, last words for this vodcast. Make sure you guys hop on Modules 6 and 7 this week, because next week is going to sneak up on you. 2 modules in 1 week is a lot of material, but we're also in a summer course, so make sure you hop on that material early and don't put it off. You're going to need to prioritize this.